All right, good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be here with all of you in person and online to celebrate the Mental Health Guide for Cis and Trans Queer Guys, Skills to Cope and Thrive as Your Authentic Self. We're here with the author, Rahim Thawer, in conversation with Ethan Coston. And we're really happy to have this because this book is more important than ever right now. Our communities are really facing a lot of external and proximal stress. And so we need more books like this and more spaces to talk about emotional and mental health. So I'm really glad that you have come all this way to be with us. Thank you, Rahim. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Rahim and Ethan. First, our conversation partner, Ethan. Ethan uses he and they pronouns, and Ethan is an associate professor of gender, sexuality, and women's studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. For more than 15 years, Ethan has been collaborating on and leading inter and transdisciplinary projects to develop and implement community-based programs supporting thriving among people who, like himself, are survivors of violence, 2S LGBTQIA+, disabled and or neurodivergent, and systems impacted. Among the many hats they wear, Ethan is PI and founding director of the Sexual Health Exploration Project, associate editor of LGBTQ Health for the American Journal of Public Health, and member of the board of directors for the Virginia League for Planned Parenthood. Yeah. When not teaching or engaging in public science pursuits, you can find Ethan enjoying the local music scene, taking photographs on their grandfather's vintage Nikora mat, making Midwestern casseroles for community gatherings, or hanging out at home with their elderly dog. What kind of dog do you have? Now you can tell us.
Well, he looks, everyone thinks he's a Chihuahua or Terrier mix, but he's actually predominantly a Pomeranian, and he acts like it too. So,
is that code for he's obnoxious?
a little bit.
Ankle biter.
It's a little bit code for he barks all the time. He's angsty and full of terror over everything, and he prefers to be inside and underneath a blanket whenever possible. Yeah.
So he's a Cancer.
Well, the person of the hour is Rahim Thawer. Rahim uses he, him pronouns, and Rahim is a registered social worker and Canadian certified supervisor who works as an instructor, psychotherapist, consultant, public speaker, podcast host, and writer. He founded Effective Counseling and Psychotherapy Services in 2014 and has delivered nearly 200 presentations and talks since then. His community workshops have inspired critical conversations and opportunities for reflection on mental health, interpersonal effectiveness, systemic oppression, and innovation in queer relationships. Rahim was a co-editor of Any Other Way, How Toronto Got Queer, which was nominated for the Toronto Book Awards. And more recently, he has self-published 4 clinical guides related to assessment, treatment planning, documentation practices, and using reflexivity in examining countertransference. He also has 3 books slated for release in 2025, including the one we're celebrating today, as well as The Politicized Practitioner, The Essential Reader for Social Workers and Psychotherapists, and Queerituality, LGBTQ plus Muslims on Mental Health and Healing. So again, we're so glad to have y'all here. So glad to have everybody with us in the audience. There will be an opportunity to ask questions after Ethan and Rahim's conversation. So if you're in the audience, just raise your physically with us, just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. So please wait till I get to you just so that everybody who's watching online can hear you. And if you are online and want to ask a question, you can just drop it in the chat at any time and I will incorporate it into the conversation. So without further ado, please welcome, put your hands together for Rahim and Ethan.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you to Charis for sponsoring this event. Thanks to Rahim for asking me to be here and facilitate the asking of what I hope are some really great questions to generate dialogue and thought among all of us. Before we jump off and get started, though, I actually wanted to take a moment to invite everyone, if it's available to you, if it feels comfortable to you, whether you're here physically or with us virtually, to really center into whatever space you're in. And if you can, to sort of like come home to yourself a bit. We all have a lot going on in our lives, in the world. It can be hard to sort of be physically present in a space and to be aware of how you're feeling in your body, in your mind. So again, if it's available to you, if it feels comfortable to you, I would invite you to really feel the object you're sitting on or your feet on the ground, like really feel something physically that you're in. Maybe rest your eyes, look down, or if you want to, you can close your eyes even if that feels good to you. And just breathe for a moment. It doesn't have to be deep. It can be deep if you want, though. But just breathe. As you're centering into yourself, I'll just make a note. We talk about lots of fun things today, but we also talk about a couple of serious things today. And I learned from some colleagues and friends of mine at Heal Sweet Home. I don't know if you know that organization. Just did a relaunch and a rebrand. They used to be called the Heal Project, but now they're Heal Sweet Home. I went to one of their webinars recently, and they said, in the new year, we're getting rid of trigger warnings, like before we talk about serious things, because almost everything we talk about is really serious. One, so it's really hard to keep up with, like, I'm about to talk about something traumatic when that's sort of in the space or in the conversation all the time. And they also said sometimes when you give a trigger warning, it can actually make someone feel more anxious in preparation for what they're going to hear. And so they said, instead, we're going to start by inviting people to come into their strength, to come into their power, to come into their autonomy, to come into their bravery. And so that's what I hope you all will do with us as we're engaging in some often serious parts of conversation, is to feel brave and strong and full of agency, and know that you can always take care of yourself however you need to. So if you need to mute the virtual cast for a moment or step away, if you need to get up, don't be afraid to walk in front of where the camera is that we're casting. Remove yourself from the space if you need to. Do what you need to take care of yourself.
I'm here to do stand-up comedy, so
Thank you. All right, so now to the topic. Why we're here, Rahim. You did already get a very lovely introduction, but I am also excited to tell folks some things about you that I know. I'm excited to introduce you because you are really prolific in this area, I think. I mean, so you're a psychotherapist and a sex therapist. You've been doing that for more than a decade. You have, as we've heard, 4 or 5 books or contributions to books, many of them recently or coming out this year. You have a very well-read blog on Medium with essays that you regularly share with the world. You've got the CBT Dive podcast, which everyone should watch. And in addition,
have you watched it?
I have.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. You can find it on YouTube and and other places. You consult on diversity and equity initiatives. You have run programming with community organizations. You supervise future clinicians. You also are enrolled full-time in the Doctor of Social Work program at the University of Alabama. And in addition to that, you work for them teaching full-time, which I believe the last time you talked to me was something like 10 or 12 classes a year, including in the summers. And still, somehow, you have found time to be here with us today to talk about this book, The Mental Health Guide for Cis and Trans Guys. And so
I don't have a lot of friends right now.
So free time, a social life. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to you to sort of intro us to the book and the work and
Sure.
and how you wanna get us started.
All right. Thank you for that introduction to ER and to Ethan. Thank you for coming. This book is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I first started working in Toronto's HIV sector, and HIV funding is often centered around epidemiological data. Which groups of people are most affected by what concern, illness, challenge, and epidemiology always has a difficult time separating behavior and identity. And you need to think about those things when you're trying to capture data. And in that work, while I was a social worker talking about feelings and context and environment and relationships, so much of the work was centered around HIV prevention or access to treatment for people who are HIV positive or access to support. If it wasn't those things, it was identifying if you are at quote unquote high risk and could benefit from services to prevent transmission of HIV. And while all of that is important and valuable, I found that queer guys' experiences was almost exclusively in the nonprofit social service sector connected to HIV. Um, and there's so much more to our lives, obviously. Um, and I started developing workshops on things that affect queer guys. So I will make a quick note that this book says cis and trans queer guys. What I'm referring to, I didn't just add on trans as an afterthought to be like just, oh, let's be inclusive. I'm thinking more specifically about a lot of mainstream cis gay culture, cultivated often by gay men or with cis gay men at the helm, if you will, that queer trans guys also participate in, because that's kind of my subculture. If you're not part of that subculture, that doesn't mean this talk won't be relevant to you, but I just wanted to lay that out. And so when I think about that subculture, I think about what are the things that affect our mental health. So I did workshops on body image, relationships, substance use, um, really other things. No, sexual communication, and the like. And then I thought, you know what? This isn't just about things we experience in our subculture or that are unique to our experience. I think what could be valuable is to really position each of these things that I talk about that I think our people experience as social determinants of our mental health outcomes. So, for people who are familiar with the World Health Organization, um, a lot of work and initiatives that are funded by WHO are rooted or grounded in the social determinants framework, and that framework would say things like, you know, it would list off things that contribute to people's physical health outcomes, like adequate housing, stable income, freedom from discrimination, freedom from gender based violence, economic resources or opportunity, and those are great. Those are really broad things, right? So, and they make complete sense. Like, if you have employment, that gives you access to healthier food, most likely. So, while that really makes sense as an overarching theory, I was thinking about what are the social determinants of mental health outcomes. And it's not like nobody's talked about this. People have written about it. But I'm coming from a perspective of saying what goes on in our subcultures as queer guys into other guys, and what is it like to grow up in a dominant culture that's cisgender, heterosexual, and to internalize those messages and values, and then you don't toss those out completely. Some people think they do, but they have a lot of shame still. Uh, and then you're in another community that has its own norms and its own challenges, and you internalize those. And so when we put these things together, there's all kinds of things that affect our mental health outcomes. So in my book, I split up into three sections, like um, social context, connection, and health. And each chapter is a determinant. And for me, I'm thinking a lot about what I've seen in my own life, in the lives of my friends, in the lives of clients that I've worked with. And so I start the book with internalized shame. I'm like, this is the thing everybody's got in some shape or form. And So under, social context, we've got shame, coming out, family of origin. Under connection, there's like 3 chapters connected to relationships without specifically saying relationships. Connection seeking, endings in queer love. Um, what's another one? Oh, managing endings and rejection. And the reason I do that is because this isn't like any other social determinant of health. It's not about having something or not having something. It's not about like having the job, not having the job. It's not about having the relationship or not having it. It's more like, how do you move through a cultural context in which like expectations are imposed on you and some of which you endorse, right? Meaning like, you think I should be in a relationship? Hey, I also want that for myself, and there'll be some that you don't endorse. Hey, you want me to be very skinny? I might push back on that, So it's not about having or not having, it's about moving through. And under health, and I don't love that it's under this umbrella, to be honest, but I put aging, substance use, access to medical care. Um, and the reason I don't like aging and substance use there, because I think those aren't about physical health. I think those are about social emotional well-being. But some of the challenges that come up in those contexts are often paired with primary care services. So it made sense thematically to put them there. One other thing I'll tell you about the book is that I draw on 3 different therapeutic modalities, and they're my favorite. I mean, they're the ones I was trained in. So there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's Gestalt therapy, and there's psychoanalytic thought or inquiry. And lots of people, there's misconceptions or preconceptions about CBT and psychoanalysis. So I just want to even ask people here, like, how many people have heard of cognitive behavioral therapy? And how many people are fairly certain they hate it? Okay. So I just want to say I recognize that. I also want to say that there's different things that can be done from a CBT lens. So there's something called a thought record, which is designed to help you shift a pattern of thinking where you have an unhelpful thinking style. So if I was like, I want to ask Ethan out on a date, which I've done, he said no, but it's fine. If I want to ask Ethan out on a date, and well, I lost my train of thought, and I was hesitant to do that. Yes, I would never be hesitant, but if I were timid, I was hesitant. My therapist might say, from a CBT lens, when you feel anxious or hesitant, what thoughts are coming up for you? What are your automatic thoughts? And I would say, oh, I don't want to be rejected, or let's just go with I don't want to be rejected. The follow-up question would be, and if that happened, what would it mean to you? What would it say about you? How would that activate previous stories you have about yourself? What would the long-term consequence be? You want to distill it a bit and then evaluate that thought, right? So if I came up with something like, and this is what often happens, is you go from a thought like, oh, if he rejects me, that'll be bad, to I'm worried I'm unlovable. When you distill it and you spend some time in therapy, it often will get you to a place similar to that. Or something that's more deterministic or fatalistic, like if this person says no, that's another example of the kind of rejection I'm always destined to have. Or I am, this reinforces the idea that I'll always be alone. Those are thoughts that can be worked with to say, what is the evidence that supports this? What is the evidence that works against this, so doesn't support it? And what's a helpful alternative way of thinking about this? And alternative thoughts get misused all the time. They're not affirmations. I would not want to leave that CBT session with an alternative thought that says, I'm loved by everyone. Like, that might not be true. I mean, I do happen to be loved by everyone, but that might not be, it's not like thing that's realistic to walk away with. It's not an affirmation. It's more realistic to say something like, it's okay to get rejected. It's okay for it to hurt. It actually doesn't say anything about the future. Um, Somebody I barely know that I want to ask out on a date can in no way be the psychic portal through which I can predict the future, right? So it's in that way that CBT can be helpful. What a lot of people struggle with is that they think about CBT as gaslighting or changing your thoughts as a way to disillusion yourself or to counter what you know to be true. In truth, in CBT, you can use something called problem solving. And this book uses more problem solving than thought records. Problem solving says the thing you're worried about, that automatic thought, we're not trying to change it because we're not trying to say it's unhelpful. We're just saying it's factual. I'm going to go to this event and I could experience racism. Or I could go to this event and nobody will talk to me. If you know that to be true, let's first identify what your goals are. And then let's talk about exhaustively all of your options. So if I said, my option is I could not ask Ethan out and then I'll just go about my life, that's like a fine option. But the therapist would ask, but what is your goal? My goal is to feel validated or to go on a date with somebody. We get to figure out what all the goals are, and then the action has to match the goal. So, you know, we've all grown up with, I think, with people saying things like, if someone's a bully, just walk away, or if you don't like something, just walk away. People can't do that because that doesn't match up with their goal. Their goal is revenge, let the other person know how much they hurt them, to have the last word, to feel seen, to feel heard, etc. So with problem solving, it's more linear, and we think about actions that make sense in relation to your goal. So I wanted to give a long explanation in defense of CBT because I think it can be used in ways that are helpful. The other modality I use in this book is Gestalt therapy, which is about being in your body. And it often has to do with connection and unfinished business. So you could have a conversation with, your inner child, an earlier version of yourself, an older version of yourself, or your future self, an ancestor, a childhood bully. It could also be an object or an entity. Like I've had lots of conversations in my own Gestalt therapy in the empty chair with my father, or in the empty chair was alcohol, or in the empty chair was one of the many stimulant drugs I loved. Which, if anyone has a hookup, just kidding. Just kidding. I've also had my stomach, my butthole. I put all kinds of body parts in the empty chair, right? And it's an opportunity to have a conversation in a way that creates a relationship where you otherwise would not have thought there was. And it helps close the gap between you and the part of you that you criticize or the person you've been uncertain about. Finally, in each chapter there's sections called Digging Deeper, and those are driven by psychoanalytic thought. And I think some people see psychoanalysis and they're like, oh, isn't that like it's outdated, it's this and that. Yes and no. Like there's many people who do anti-oppressive, social justice focused work in psychoanalysis. Like there is a book called Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, which is written by Palestinian folks. So it depends on where you look. The crux of it is just that early childhood is important. It leaves a mark. And there's some thinking about the unconscious. So I did something that went against what I was hoping to do. There's probably an unconscious defense mechanism there, like denial, avoidance, projection, etc. And so those questions get us to think a bit more deeply on our own, with friends, or with a therapist if you want. And so that's the inspiration, structure, and approach that I use with this book. And I think that's all I got for that.
Can I ask you to dig deeper? Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. And just for everyone watching and here with us, it wasn't a no, okay?
Yes. No.
It was
yes.
it was a maybe, and we'll see how it goes.
Yes.
And it takes a long time for me to get to know people, and
Oh, you mean the date?
well, like, just not to give you too much reassurance, but it wasn't a no, is all I'm saying. Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and they go in the organization of the book. So I want to start with social context. And like you said, there's a lot of questions I could ask about things like coming out and other developmental milestones or microaggressions. You talk about other forms of violence and the internalization of shame. But I actually want to ask a question that I think gets a little bit at all of those topics, and that's grief or grieving. I think a lot of us are grieving a lot of things all of the time, both things in our personal life and things sociopolitically, right? I'm wondering if you can maybe walk us through how you think about and how one might approach things like loss or abandonment, isolation, the impacts of living in a white supremacist, anti-indigenous, anti-black, anti-immigrant, capitalist, ableist world. It's a lot of things, right? But that's a lot of grieving, right? To be carrying, and maybe to be doing, and maybe to be avoiding. I think a lot of people might be avoiding the grieving. So how do you approach those topics? And in thinking about this book specifically, how's it different for queer guys, maybe, in the social context? And I would say queer guys, and then people like me who are like guy adjacent.
Right. Okay. That's a lot of questions. So grief. So grief is an emotional experience, right? I wouldn't say grief is a feeling. It's like a whole web of feelings. And grief is our response to loss. Now, there can be death losses and non-death losses. And when we talk about living in a world that feels dangerous, or we experience things every now and then that really feel like a gut punch, we really feel quite isolated. What we're grieving is safety or a sense of citizenship, where we think like, here's a place that I belong to. Now this really awful thing happened and I'm not sure I belong here. What makes me feel more unhinged or dislodged is that I don't have other people who get it or see me or feel the same thing. So grief shows up in like this dynamic way almost, through isolation, through sadness. And so when we reflect deeper on what's going on underneath sadness and isolation, often it's grief. When there's rage, lots of avoidance through substance use, sex, like those things can be great. They can also be great ways to not feel or to redirect your feelings. And so underneath that could be grief. I think for a lot of queer and trans people, right when they knew they were different or they didn't fit into gendered spaces, their grief process kind of began, right? So the first grief I think a lot of us have is gender. And I don't think that goes away. Like when I think about even cis gay men's culture, where like it's very popular to go to the gym and look really buff, we kind of accepted like, oh, this is just like how this community looks. And I look at that and I'm like, yes, and you're grieving. You're grieving masculinity, years of not fitting in, being unsure of how you fit into the world when you don't follow like heteronormative milestones. You're not getting married, having a child, doing this, doing that, and you need a signifier that makes you feel seen, relevant, of purpose, all of this kind of stuff. And so I think there's a constant grief that's happening there. Gender doesn't go away, obviously. And the grief around feeling like you're failing gender, I don't think goes away. You could get more comfortable in your skin, of course, but the world reminds you all the time, you know, when you're not enough of something, or when you're responding in a way that's gendered, and it makes somebody else uncomfortable. Like they'll tell you, you know, they'll be like, "Oh, you shouldn't cry," or "You shouldn't do this," or "Oh, you really want to wear that," and all of that is gendered. For a lot of folks, before they come out, or they, not that everyone has to come out, but for those people who are thinking about it or have thought about it, they've anticipated rejection from their family. They've anticipated rejection from their religious communities. So they've anticipated grief, and many people have experienced it, like the loss. Sorry, and that loss comes in so many forms. You know, there's a theory around something called disenfranchised grief or unacknowledged grief. And that theory talks about grief that isn't acknowledged by society because of who the person is that died, or what it is that was lost, or the method or the medium through which the thing was lost. So that might sound really abstract, but for example, if somebody who's incarcerated dies, you might feel a lot of disenfranchised grief. Like society's not going to say, "Oh, that grief is valid." They're going to say, "Oh, well, that person did a bad thing." An ex-lover, somebody who is important to you, but you're not blood kin or legally kin. Pet loss is a common form of disenfranchised grief. Loss to overdose. So when I say medium or method, you know, it's hard to get support when somebody dies from an overdose or something drug related, because the reframe is like, well, they made a choice. And then your grief gets minimized because the best the world around you can do, and I do believe they're trying their best, but it falls short, because the best they can sometimes do is try to like caution you or remind you not to make the same choices that other person made. And that's entirely unhelpful in those moments. And so I think for a lot of queer people, we know grief intimately. We may or may not label it that way. I think we know it intimately. I think we also know about unacknowledged grief, you know? People know about loss to the AIDS crisis. People know about loss as a result of being just being a minority, you know? Like the number of trans women and trans women of color in particular that lose their life to homicide every year in both Canada and the United States. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that they're astronomical, and they often don't make the news, you know. And the grief there is injustice. The grief is about your kin and your people not being valued. The grief there is like of how people can move on without recognizing the gravity of such a loss. And you know, we've seen grief around like incarceration, police brutality, all kinds of things. And what really hits is like the reminder or of genocide. You know, we're reminded of like how little some lives are worth relative to others. And that is a painful thing to sit with. It's such a painful thing to sit with. Um, I I mean I yeah I anyway I won't go too much into politics, but there's a reminder regularly on the news, you know. And so I think for when we talk, sorry, the last part of your question was like, what do we do? You know, with grief, I wouldn't say we need to change our thoughts. I mean, you can to some degree. So like one thing I say to myself is, it's okay to be in pain because that means you can love. A friend of mine died just 2 weeks ago. It's only 41. It was really sudden. And I've just been feeling it for so many days. And my automatic thought, if I have to think about it that way, is like, was I that close to him? Did he love me that much? Should I feel it this deeply? And then I kind of had to say to myself, like, you're feeling what you're feeling. Sorry, give me a moment. And it's okay to take time to process it. And you can't be in control of what processing it looks like. So sometimes it'll be being horizontal on the couch, other times it's pushing yourself to do something or to talk about it. But I know for me, a big part of managing grief is reminding myself that this is an area of life you cannot have control over. No matter how much your personality wants control, you don't have it. And it's also a reminder that like we need to keep creating like cultivating community and family so that we can honor each other when one of us is gone in a way that really actually honors who we were. Because for a lot of queer and trans people, our families of origin, even when they're loving and well intentioned, might not know about the real person we are day to day. And so they're going to have their ritual around loss, and it'd be nice to have people who really got you and saw you to have that ritual. And so like the vigils, um, coming together, this idea of queer kin or chosen family, I think all of that is very important. It's not just language. Like I think we need to think about what it means to live by that and to cultivate that. There's a lot of us that are going to age as single people, and that could be by choice or by chance. And that's an absolutely okay way to be in the world. But we're going to need people. You can't do everything on your own. You need people, And so we need to prepare so that we have support for the grief that is to come.
Yeah. And I really, in the book, and you mentioned some of these words here, but I just, to reiterate, love this idea that, with grief, it really is about legitimizing it, right? Like it is real and it is okay to feel these feelings. Yeah. Number one, not like downplaying it that somehow it's bad or it's wrong, which is counter to the socialization I think so many of us have, right? Is to not feel it. So legitimize it, honor it, in some way. I feel like there's a lot to be said in my life for these small rituals around grief, like lighting that special candle or like writing it down and burning the note in a fire, or like really honor the feelings that I'm having.
Are you a charmed one?
I'm a little bit of a garden witch,
I love that.
Yeah, so honor it, and then you can start to process it a bit, but in community, key.
I think for queer guys, because that was also part of your question, and I'll just touch on it briefly, and that is to say that most, like, gay people in general are not like somehow evolved because they came out, like they were also socialized in these dominant systems. So like for queer guys, that might mean not knowing how to be in touch with your emotion or feeling like you're weak if you ask for something. We adapt to cope and to survive in very gendered ways as well. And sometimes that means like you're compulsively self-reliant, or you don't know, like there's no space to even name grief or sadness. You just like have to keep pushing through. And if I think psychoanalytically, things that are not processed, they come out as other kinds of symptomology, So suddenly you have anxiety in your at work, or you have like unreliable sexual energy or function. Like that doesn't come from nowhere. I would say like if you push something down, it comes out in a physical or emotional symptom in another context.
Take it out on the people you love.
Say it again.
Take it out on the people you love.
Yes.
Right? I mean, a short fuse. Whatever.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's transition to talk about something a little more fun.
Okay.
Because I like to talk about the juicy stuff too, and you do, and in your book you do talk about sex. So not just relationships and intimacy and dating, but sex. And I love that because it's so much that you write about is so relevant to my personal life, because I started.
Tell us about your sex life.
Well, I'm not going to tell you all about. I have some family members in the virtual cast, so we'll keep it PG-13 adjacent.
Okay.
But no, but I started testosterone 5 years ago, so I'm a late in life transitioning person. And always been into guys, but only in the last 5 years did that somehow make me like gay adjacent with my sexuality, and I'm having to navigate new spaces and a whole new culture I didn't really know much about from the inside anyway. I'm having to think about things so differently than I had before when I was high femme, presenting in life, and everyone thought that I was straight, you know. And so I think dating, relationships, intimacy, sex, fun, also hard for a lot of us. I know a lot of people who struggle on apps in all kinds of ways. You do some workshops around aging and apps, which I love, to do a little app literacy. But I just, apps can be difficult, really hard. We're searching for like-minded people, but, at least for the things that I'm into or the communities I'm a part of, you've got kinky folks saying they're kinky, but really they don't know anything about boundaries and communication, and that can really quickly turn into things that are slightly adjacent to or are abusive. You've got non-monogamous people of all kinds, but I found a lot of people using the term relationship anarchy when really they just don't really want to think about anyone else's feelings or needs. So like when I say relationship anarchy, maybe it's not the same thing that they mean when they use it, right?
There was a whole wave of clients I had that were like, I'm non-hierarchical poly. And I was like, I don't completely believe you. So we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
That sounds like a nice thing, but I think it means different things to different people.
Yes.
And so we need to really back it up.
Yes. And we get ghosted and we get burned by people, and then we have to like throw ourselves out there again and try. And then we have, as queer guys, I'm learning that I'm starting to think about things that I didn't before, like, what are my body proportions, and should I go to the gym more often and lift weights? And damn, my hairline is receding. Shit. Because I'm 40, so it's like it's happening. And so I start thinking more about my image than I did even when I was femme. I'm like looking at myself in the mirror more now than I did then, wondering who's gonna like what they see, looking back. In your book, you talk about becoming a love alchemist, which the garden witch in me loves, about like transforming these anxieties or these fears or these previous experiences of rejection that are inevitable, I think, if you put yourself out there, into something that's more generative for you, something that's more useful and that can sort of like propel you forward. So can you just walk us through some of the ways in which queer guys might like reclaim some of that power for like juicy, intimate encounters? I don't know, like truly lean into and be able to experience some amount of freedom in those moments and not as much sort of guardedness or protection or anxiety.
Yes. So thank you for naming some of the specific challenges that show up when you're part of a subculture. Because I think anybody, even if you're not a queer guy, you can think about the subculture you live in and you're like, what are the norms of this subculture? What's celebrated here? And how does that make me feel great or make me feel terrible? Right. So I think that's important. And I think for queer guys, and again, I say queer guys broadly, but a lot of it's cultivated by like a hegemonic cis gay man way of being. And there's a lot of innovation around relationships and connection seeking. And what I mean by that is like sex is seen as political and liberating. We've been shamed a lot about HIV risk, doing what we want, not having like these linear lives. And so to reclaim that, we celebrate the choices we make that are counter to that. However, that way of being also brings new challenges. And I think facing your mortality and facing aging is something that's not, we haven't created enough space for that, right? Because we're often thinking about our sexual currency or how we stay relevant. And then we put that inward and it becomes the body. The body is a thing, is my ticket to what I can get or how I can navigate the world. And so, the hairline, the muscles, the this and that. So first, I think we need to recognize there's like, in this like lovely bubble of being out and celebrating who you are, there's all kinds of shit that's going to make you feel bad too. There's it's not utopian. You traded some bad things for some good things, but also some good things for some bad things, frankly. Um, but if you want to lean into it and you're like, I want to participate, I think recognizing that we're all struggling is important. Um, and one thing that I found helpful is to say, I'm going to do my best not to take rejection personally, especially depending on context. And think about the apps and online connection seeking as a game. And so when I talk about it as a game, I'm saying like, this person, I missed out on this opportunity. It's probably about timing. I'm curious about technology and social behavior. You know, that's where my mind goes. Like, I wonder if I said yes at this time, this hookup could have happened, but it just feels less possible for this person at another time. Or my headspace was like dating and talking, and their headspace was something else. Or they had a vision of something that would be quick, and I had a vision of something that would be slower, or vice versa. And so I try to think about the social behavioral like dynamics that might be happening with technology. I might also be making up a story to make myself feel better. That's not true, and that's fine. I get like, please do that, right? Um, there's some instances where you can't just come up with a like that kind of reasoning because what you experience is very bad. You know, somebody will say to you, like I just like a couple months ago, I was in a city doing a talk, and I mean the night before, I was on my phone on Sniffies, which is like a geolocation app, and there was this person that wasn't far from me, and I was like, oh my gosh, hi, you're so cute, and you're so close, and his first response was, I wish we weren't. And I was like, girl, you could have also just not sent a message
literally
back.
not responded.
And he was like a youngish white guy. And like,
Mm.
he could have been like, you're not my age, you're not my type. He could have been like, not for me. He could have just not responded, and that would have been better, honestly. Because the first place my mind went to was like, oh, I wonder if it's because of like body hair or like because of my skin color or whatever. And it's such an unfortunate place for my mind to go because I don't know anything about this person. I shouldn't care that they don't want to have sex with me. I know nothing about them, right? So, but it gets woven into a kind of schema or like a pre-existing way of thinking and worry about your entire worth and value. So I think if your head goes to that place, you need to maybe take a time out, right? Because you haven't done anything wrong, but you can't just be like, I'm going to think about this like like gamify this and think about it in terms of technology and behavior because something very specific that's happened here. Um, I also think that queer people are the leaders in innovating different relationship models, and our tools just have fallen a little bit behind our heart and our minds. It's the most generous way I can put it. And so I think people are wanting to do different kinds of non-monogamy because they're like, it's cool. And I would say it absolutely is. You absolutely should consider it, try it, all of that. I think one of the things we need, and this could be from a formal workshop, a book, or like talking with your friend, like talking, you know, to say like, how do you manage jealousy? Or what happens if um, your partner has sex with somebody else and then they get an STI? Or what happens if I go out on a date with somebody else and I start to have feelings for them and I don't want to tell my partner? There's like all kinds of sticky things that like it's okay for you to be worried about talking about, but then you have to learn to talk about it, right? And I think this is the thing is like connection is inevitably, if it's going to be great and fulfilling and fun, it's also going to be a little messy and uncomfortable, and you really can't have one without the other. And so accepting that as a baseline is important. I think for a lot of us who, again, who have anticipated rejection at a young age, I think sometimes we recreate what I would call attachment wounds. So I'm going to be rejected. I'm not good enough for this reason, that reason, the other. And then I get rejected or something doesn't go the way I plan. And that schema, that way of thinking gets activated. And I think we need to separate it a bit to say, this is an older version of me talking. This context is a bit different. Here's maybe how I need to approach it. The other thing that we might need to think about is who are we seeking? And what does it mean to be with that person? Because I think sometimes we lead with our insecurities in trying to seek proximity to people who have the attributes we don't have and always wanted. So, I grew up with a lot of internalized shame around race, more than I did around sexuality, but it first showed up around race, like what kind of food do I have? Like the lunch my mom gave me, I would throw out because I'm like, oh, it smells like Indian food or Paki food or whatever. I have memories of like scrubbing myself really hard in the shower because I thought that would make me lighter skin. Like,
Yeah.
crazy fucking shit. But like the way you internalize your self hate will show up differently for different people, and you might not even think about talking about it. But if you can realize it, it will really it could potentially inform what it is you're looking for. So, I talk about this white guy on Sniffies. Doesn't mean anything to me now. 10 years ago, it would have, because he probably has attributes that I always wish would come naturally to me and don't. And I think about that because just not maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I've like met several of these like tall, buff white guys online, and I would be into it and talking to them. And then they would say something like, and one person specifically was like, oh, I've hooked up with 6 Indian guys this weekend. Or another one's like, oh, I got brown fever. And I'm like, shut up. And like, I know that's a shitty thing for them to say, but in my mind at the time, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to hook up with you and not tell anybody. Because it's like, it's also real. My point is that seeking that connection was about sexualizing unavailability. It was also about proximity to power. And decolonizing desire and dismantling power. Like, I've got to do the work to dismantle that. No one is going to do it for me. If I keep throwing myself at people that have always rejected me, it's on me to like learn a little bit from how the world works, but also to say like there's other kinds of bodies that are sexual, right? What has the world done to me that doesn't let me sexualize my own people? So for me, working on the internalized shame to do with race in particular has been very important. It's been central to being able to have authentic connections. For a lot of folks that I know, it's been about gender, like not policing themselves around how they behave or show up in the world has been a very important part. And so that means instead of seeking proximity to people who are masculine presenting or presenting their gender in some way, they're like, okay, I could be okay to be seen in public with somebody who's gender nonconforming or a femme guy or whatever it is. But I really think like for the deeper connections, we do need to confront our shame. We were talking about good, like fun stuff.
I thought so too, but it is a mental health. Yeah, so you have to, ultimately there are things we're all working. Well, I want to be, cognizant of allowing some time for folks who are here to ask questions as well, physically or virtually. So I'm gonna open it up now. We have plenty of time.
Does anybody want to kick us off? Yeah, all right, right here.
Do you have any advice for people who, because you say they also have done like sex therapy, particularly for like early trans guys who might be on the A spectrum, but are also kind of exploring that, and that's his own wheelhouse with also being queer, or attracted to men in some capacity?
Yeah, I mean, Ethan has more to say about that than me, I think. But I think what I would say is, like, from a mental health hat, I would be thinking about what are the contexts and environments that activate difficult or bad feelings. Some people will call that anxiety, people will call that dysphoria, whatever it is. What are the settings that activate that the most? And then to think about, like, is that an environment that makes me feel not great right now? Is that one that I ultimately do want to be able to participate in? Or should I be looking for another environment, context, group of people, or subculture that I want to be part of? I think it's challenging to just say like, F this whole group of people who have these like very normative standards and bodies when you're like, okay, but actually I want to be able to participate in it a little bit. So I think being realistic about that is important. And then thinking about how you enter those spaces. going with somebody or having somebody who understands you a little bit is very important. I think one thing that's challenging sometimes in our communities is um, uh, people want to, because a lot of us meet online. Uh, if people don't think that they want to have sex with you, they're not sure if they want to continue even talking to you.
Yeah.
And and so to be clearer on online profiles to say like, I could be up for this, but if you want to be my pal, I'm also interested in these things. And that might sound basic, but like, there's a lot of people who are like, I feel very lonely. I can't meet my people, and I'm like, hey, how do you meet people? Like the internet. Well, they don't say internet, but apps. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you put out there? Pretty much the equivalent of a blank profile. And I'm thinking, there's also a psychology behind that, to see what comes your way. And I think I the people who put very little out there to cast the net very wide, they often feel a lot of pain because they're feeling rejection from people they weren't even that interested in. But the rejection still sits heavy, you know? In terms of like an ace identity or, being on the asexual spectrum,
Yeah.
I think there's like we're all part of a sexual minority community,
Yeah.
but that's a community that's frankly doesn't have nearly as much visibility as everybody else. So I think if you're willing to, or if it's in your energy capacity, there might be like preparing, like, how do I explain this to somebody?
Yeah.
Because they could be into it but not know what it means.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, I haven't done much dating apps, particularly like more when I transitioned. I've only been on 5 months on T, and I also have the interesting of not having an increased libido or anything like that.
Right.
But that could be a mixture of a couple different things.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just exploring kind of where I'm sitting at now, because I thought like for myself, for some people, like their discomfort or dysphoria will also like suppress that for themselves versus like when they're more comfortable than for their sexuality being.
Yeah.
That's not been my experience, but I also think there could be other stuff. I think though on specifically, I get a different interaction if I put ace versus if I put queer.
Right.
Where I will get zero interaction versus I will get mine for myself. I'm just like trying to have like the openness to try to see where things land. But again, with apps, it can be the kind of thing of like, there's this one picture flat screen. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's kind of my curiosity.
Yeah. One other thing I would say is, I we sometimes have this idea that we have to have things really figured out for other people. There's this like, what are you bringing to the table kind of mindset. And when it comes to identity, you're talking about maybe who you've always known yourself to be, but more about how you're being experienced by the world and what circles you're moving in and how you're moving in. I think a big part of our identity environment. And so there's some things that we can't force. Like it's like the passage of time and a series of experiences that let us know what that will look like. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It can. It's hard because it's like it feels like you're wanting to know all the answers, but you can't know the answers about experiencing and seeing what sits with you.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And I'll just add as someone, so like I don't really, of all the terms I could use to describe myself, which I'm too neurodivergent for labels. I really, really don't like any of them. But like I do feel kind of drawn to sharing with people that the closest thing might be demisexual, in the sense that like I do experience quite a bit of attraction and desire and whatever, but absolutely no interest in acting on any of that unless I feel kind of deeply connected to someone, like emotionally, intellectually connected, because there's an element of like safety there, right? Where it's like, we've talked, you know me now, you get me now. So by the point that we do anything intimate with each other, you already know how I feel about, like, I'm mostly this, but sometimes this, and this is what I like and this is what I don't like. I want to know people's fears and anxieties before we,
Oh.
get frisky. But that's just that's just me, that's just me. But I think in that way, like I'm always up front then on apps when people are like, oh, well, do you want to meet later? Whatever. And it's like, well, we could go on like a traditional date. Like we could meet for coffee and have a conversation. Because that's where the starting point is for me. And a lot of people aren't interested in that, but a number of people have been. And so, you just go slow, I think, and explore.
But this conversation here is exactly the kind that we need around relationship orientation, right?
Yeah.
Sexual orientation, fine. But relationship orientation is important. And like, what are the models we gravitate toward? Like, when I hear you talk about like a demisexual orientation, I know that as an avoidantly attached person, having an encounter with somebody that I don't know very well, but have like some connection with, like 90 minutes worth, like that's like the best. Because if I know them more, then there's more, like, my fears, there's more vulnerability, and the stakes feel higher. So we're all kind of oriented differently, and knowing that is important, I think, or being able to talk about
Yes.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else?
You were talking about this idea of kind of like being sexually attracted to people that maybe fulfill something in terms of like maybe like your self-hate almost.
Yeah.
I think for me that shows up in like having sex with people who view me as a woman and kind of not honoring my own non-binary identity sometimes. And that's not always the case, but I've noticed that pattern. So I'm curious about this idea of this desire to be wanted, and this desire to be wanted in an almost kind of like fulfilling this self-hating way, and then maybe what strategies are for like breaking that cycle.
So I think I would try to separate it, to say that not all encounters with a person who experiences me as a woman or as is going to be about self-hate. Part of it is like being able to participate in a world that is fairly rigid, even when it thinks it's fluid. That's pretty normative, even when it thinks it's accepting, And so a piece of it is like, okay, these are the cards I have, and this is how maybe I can participate in the world. And that's not necessarily about my self-hate, but we all have a bit of internalized shame. And we might say, okay, that internalized shame is getting activated a lot in this context or with this type of person. So the next thing could be trying to balance that out with friendships, encounters, peer support groups, like whatever it is, with the experience. But the trade-off is the weight with which you receive validation. And it's a hard thing to let go of. So, if I think about me, I'm like, okay, if I don't want to be reduced to something or fetishized for race or something, then that means I have to look this way, and that means I have to do another kind of work. And sure, I can do that work, but A, it's exhausting. B, I don't know what it's going to yield or what progress looks like necessarily. Like, it's not a smart goal, You're like, I'm going to know my internalized shame is fixed because I'll be able to do this. I mean, maybe, it's hard to measure, and it comes with a bit more loneliness. And if it doesn't come with something action oriented, like I will try this or I'm going to try that, it can feel like stagnation. And so I think like thinking about who are the kinds of people I want to be connected to and what can I do to try to get that started, and not being committed to the outcomes because we can't control them in this context. And to know that I might still be living in multiple worlds, but it would be so great if like this other world that I'm imagining that I haven't experienced that shows up and takes over. I'm still there. So like I will say though, one thing that's helped me, and the context is different, but like being with like around brown gay men who don't hate their skin or like their bodies, that has been revolutionary. Like it's been so helpful. You know, my ex-partner was a white trans guy, and his body politics were so um, so influential because I would say self-deprecating things about myself, and he would pause and be like, "Why do you have to bring that into our house? Like that's what we face out there. Why would you bring that in here?" And it brings me to tears to think about that sometimes, you know, because here's a person who is saying, "I love you. I understand you feel this way, but you're bringing something in that hurts both of us." And oh, it's like that was an 8 year ago conversation, and I still feel it, and that lets me know that that is the kind of energy I need. And so I hope we can all find that kind of energy, you know, um, just which just like some real talk about like um, undoing the ways we have learned to not like ourselves.
Which is probably present for everyone in any intimate
Yes,
relational or sexual encounter, whether they admit that out loud or
100%.
not.
If I were to think about a Gestalt exercise, though, I might say um, I would work with what I would call polarities. So I would say let's have two chairs. One is going to be the part of you that wants validation, and there's another part of you that wants to truly be seen. Those don't have to be polars, but like in this context, I might just set it up that way and say, part of you that wants that validation, talk to this part of you that wants to be truly seen. And how does the part of you that wants to truly be seen, how do they hold you back? How do they uh, haunt you? How do they invite you to a new experience? How have they always been around? How have they been hidden? And then to switch and to say, okay, now I want you to be the person that's truly you, the part of you that talk as the person who wants to be seen and talk to validation and tell validation some things like, how does your need for validation get in the way of what I want? How do you take the driver's seat by default without asking me if I want to be in the driver's seat? And think about what it would look like to cultivate a conversation between those two parts so that they're not so far apart. Does that make sense?
I'm a drama therapist, so I'm very obsessed with that exercise. So thank you.
Okay, great. Anyway, yeah.
Hello. A few questions, but we can just stick with whatever's comfortable. Just to start us off, can you speak a little bit more about how your book relates to the subject of maybe segregation in the LGBT community and how this work can be a framework to support or not support that bridge of reconnection?
Yes. So, you know, my hope is that when people do some of their own work and talk about microaggression, talk about homophobia, talk about internalized shame, family of origin, they're getting to their own vulnerability and they're working through the insecurities that otherwise would be acted out as hate, exclusion, recreating harmful hierarchies. Um, One of the limitations of an individualized intervention is that it doesn't necessarily create systemic change, you know? And we live in a queer community where uh, there's lots of racism. People say things very openly about who they're interested in and specifically who they don't want to even contact them. Um, and I think the online medium, frankly, is too volatile for. So when it comes to connection seeking, where um, a lot of these divisions are like unfiltered and very emboldened, I think that's not the best ground for bridging work. And I think it's like in our everyday lives to think about who do we want to build relationships with. You know, I think there was a time when I think about in my early 20s, and this is normal for that time in life, but I was just happy to be friends with everybody. I was like, oh my God, this is my best friend. Translation, I met you at a bar, you know? And like, I continued to see you at that bar for 3 weeks straight. So now, obviously, best friend. And so I think, and nothing wrong with that. But thinking about intentional friendships outside of partying spaces can be really important, um, because then we're cultivating intentionally. I think another thing that's important is, um, in friendships where people exist across difference, to be able to get to a place where there's enough comfort, love, and generosity for people to not know. Balancing act. But when I did some of that work in the some of my earlier years, I would do these anti workshops at the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and it's for volunteers. And it was a lot of queer people across generations. And there was a lot of white older gay men who would come up to me afterward and be like, "Thank you so much. Like, what you've explained to me here helps me understand things that people are talking about on social media, but it does. It's never felt like a conversation like this." Um, and so I really think we need to cultivate more spaces for that. Um, does my book do that on its own? I would really wouldn't give it that much credit. Like, I just don't think it can, And I think we have to be honest about the ways in which psychotherapy is like a neoliberal, individualized, career driven thing that I'm benefiting from, that's not going to solve like systemic oppression. It could be a piece, right? If you endorse the idea that like self-awareness and personal growth can make you a better human in the world and that has ripple effects, that's the best it could do.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer for a very hard question.
I'm here for it, girl. All right, number 2, bring them on.
Alrighty. Kind of segueing from that, when we're talking about having something like when you're in those certain marginalized communities, finding community, like you say, for the community, for a gay Black man community, or just a gay or a Black community in general, how does one, or what spaces do you think, or a better way to ask that is, in what ways do you see like the internal interpretations that we have in ourselves and the conflict that we experience? How can you share a little bit about how, when those moments kind of come up, like how you can work through them for yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So um, I think the first thing is to think about, how do I feel when I'm in a space with other people that look like me? What is it like when I'm in a space with other people who don't look like me, right? Those are just 2 scenarios. And then let's make 2 more quadrants. I'm in a place with people. The 4th quadrant would be, I'm in a place of people that are that all look like me, and there's one person that doesn't. How do is a bit of some scaffolding or a framework to understand my own relationship to race. Do I see my own people as sexual beings? Do I see them as competition? Do I feel safety around them? Do I feel anxiety about performing? Am I Black enough? Am I brown? Like, what? Am I Muslim enough around them? Do they bring out safety or anxiety? And then, in terms of what I want to do I want to lean into curiosity, or do I want to withdraw because it doesn't feel safe? I think when I've talked to my white friends about it, they're like, "Oh my god, the mental gymnastics." And I'm like, "I have mental gymnastics just leaving a tip." I'm like, "What are they gonna think about? Like, how much is it gonna amount for?" It's good. I just think so many things are. You're like, it's gonna be attributed to my race, and it may or may not. I mean, I have no control over it, but that's where my mind goes. Um, and so I think we need to dig into those mental gymnastics a bit, and sometimes there is work to be done around challenging ourselves, and other times you have to give yourself some self-compassion. So if you're like, I go into a space of a lot of men of color and I'm not finding them attractive, or there's one white guy there and I feel like we're competing for his attention, I would say, like, do what you need to do. And then also take some time to think about how you show up in that space and what you would like it to be, you know? Um, I think about like these random scenarios. I was in Singapore and I remember I was at a gay bar and there was a white guy called on stage and he was somewhere from Canada, which is like a big place. We have nothing in common. And part of me thought, oh my gosh, I want to go talk to him. Nothing wrong with that. But then I'm also thinking, like, immediately I'm into him sexually, and is it because, like, what are the mental gymnastics? Am I thinking he'll be into me because he experiences me as Western? Or am I thinking he'll be into me because he likes these Eastern people and I will blend in to look like one of them? What the, like what in the white supremacy have I internalized there? You know? So, but I've just been thinking about it, articulating it for a while. So I think we all need to think about that. Because some people will say, like, in terms of like exploring sexuality, they're like, I want to do that with other people that look like me, that feel safe. And other people say, it feels too familial, like family like, and too much shame comes up. I need to do this with people that are outside of that cultural community. Both are fine. You know, like it's not like you do this and you hate yourself and you do this and you're liberated. Like you do this and you're experiencing connection and you're curious about it.
Thank you so much. Last one, when it comes to finding safety with your partner, how do you kind of talk about internal differences or cultural differences in a way that bridges safety and the time where we're talking about things we're talking about now?
Yeah. So, okay, there's not one way to do it. What I've personally found helpful is to be able to say, like, let's be able to name when each of us feels defensive, um, and then to be able to say, like, I think what you're attacking or pathologizing is part of my culture or my upbringing versus this is a behavior that I could change. And just to be willing to say that because I feel defensive, I also don't necessarily know. I think for a lot of people, like in family therapy, um, there's this saying that I heard from Dr. Terry Real. He talks about depression in men, and uh, he has this line that says, sometimes when we don't want to surrender in our own relationship, it's because of loyalty to our family of origin. And that's stuck with me for a long time. Eyebrow raised, yeah, meant something. Okay. And sometimes I think about that where I'm like, I'm fighting with my partner and I'm like, he doesn't get me because I'm brown and he's white, or I'm cis and he's trans. And sometimes it's about identity and where we've come from. And other times the defensiveness is or disloyalty to something we've always known. And if we can name that, like, I don't love how this conversation's going, but I'm feeling I want to be able to separate those two things. And then it can turn into needs. Like, I would love it if you didn't talk about my people this way, or you didn't refer to this as that. You know, I don't know what the specifics are, um, but I think it can be antagonistic and it can be a mistake, frankly, if we are in a lock. I don't know what the word is. Gridlock.
Stalemate.
Yes, stalemate, where everything interpersonal becomes systemic. Like, you don't get me because I'm a woman. You don't get me because I'm racialized. You don't get me because I'm trans. You don't, like, because there's part of that, but like we're in a relationship. We need to not flatten ourselves to this thing. Like, it's real and we need to talk about it, but there's many other things going on because it's a relationship.
Exactly. My example was people who like forks up in the dishwasher or put them down. And so like it could be just a simple conversation, but it's so many things that we don't realize that our childhood places of rejection come into our spaces of like who takes up the dishes and why we feel like it's okay to talk about it.
There are so many relationship issues that get expressed in the fight over dishes. Mm-hmm. There's a lifetime of trauma that gets expressed in the fight over the dishes and the person who's putting them away very loudly to let the other person know. It's a whole thing. But thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for sharing.
All right. We are actually beyond time, but these questions are so good. I wanted us to have time to get to them. And if you have other questions that you would like to ask Rahim privately, I'm sure that he'd be happy to receive them. we are going to go ahead and transition to the book signing part of the evening. So for our folks who are watching online, thank you for being with us. If you would like to buy the Mental Health Guide for Cis and Trans Queer Guys, you can click the green button at the bottom center of the screen to buy the book from us. It really does help us when you buy your books from us. And for everybody who's here, you can just mosey on up to the front of the room and grab a copy from Sarah, who's at the front desk. And I'll bring you a Sharpie, and you can just hang tight right there, and people will come to you and get their book signed. But how about we give these folks a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you both. This was great.